Welcome back to Dad Space. It's Dave. Glad to be here with you. Hope you're doing well. Now, I don't get this very often, but I was actually asked to be on another person's podcast. Ta-da! Yay! So I was a guest. Normally I'm the host. A little bit odd, right? Now I got to get in the passenger seat and see where we go. I was on David Price's podcast. I have links to his website and everything in the show notes. He had me on as a guest to talk about my dad journey. So if you want to know a little bit more about me, the host of the Dad Space podcast, well, let's jump over to Dave's podcast and you can get to know a little bit more about me and my backstory. Happy to share this with you. Thank you, David, for letting me share this with my audience here on Dad Space. So now you get to hear Dave, your host, as a guest on Dave's podcast. A lot of Daves, a lot of podcasts. Here on Dad Space, here we go. Let's jump over to Dave's podcast now. You ready? Buckle in. Here we go.
Welcome to the Take Back Your Life podcast. My name is David Price. I'm a certified professional life coach, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me on the show today my friend and brother and all kinds of other things that we have in common, except I think he's an accomplished musician, an accomplished entrepreneur. I think he's successful at a lot of things. So we actually have very little in common because he's a rousing success, and I'm not. But anyway, Dave Campbell is with us. Dave, how are you?
Great to be here, Dave. Two Daves again in the same room. This is awesome. I love it.
I love it. Same virtual room. You're
right
in Canada, David. What part of Canada are you in?
I am about a 10-minute drive from the beautiful Niagara Falls.
Oh, I didn't realize you were that close. That I've been in Niagara, and it's phenomenal. People say, I just don't think Niagara's that. And I'm like, just go, and you'll be blown away. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's so loud. It's so loud up there. David and I connected on his podcast, and he interviewed me. David, you're my first interview. So, I'm going to ask you to cut me some slack, and, you can give me some advice on this, and, you can tell me, look, dude, maybe hang it up or whatever, but I'm so happy to have you, David. You're such, an inspiration. You're so encouraging. You do so many things that help so many people. And I just can't tell you how thrilled I am to be in your world and for you to be in mine. So if you don't mind, David, take just a couple of minutes and introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself so that folks who are not familiar with you can kind of get a flavor of what Dave Campbell world is like.
Yeah, not only do we share a name, but we also share a background. I also was a minister for many, many years, doing ministry with my wife, primarily working with youth. And that opened doors to work with in Canada, we don't have state police, we have provincial police, working with the provincial police and helping them with young people. They came to me because they ran into a situation where a young person had destroyed their father's vehicle, and the police were called out because that young person took their life. And the police didn't know how to handle the situation, and they wanted somebody like a liaison between them and who's not a police officer and the public. So I started working with them as a young 20-something-year-old pastor, which opened doors to work in the young offenders unit and stuff, and helping in some detention centers. So it's amazing to see where you can go in ministry and who you can serve. And that's really kind of been my heart, is no matter where I'm placed and whatever comes before me, I just feel like there's a reason why I'm there. And once I figure out that reason, that's where I go all in. And for me right now, is podcasting, in the sense that I get to talk to amazing people and not only have them on my show, but share their story and connect with them in real and genuine ways. And I think that's something we need more of in this world. So that's where I'm kind of at now. I have 3 children, all growing up out of the house. So it's just my wife, Jennifer, and myself, and a lot of stuff in the house that we need to navigate and figure out what are we going to do with all this stuff. So that's kind of where we are. We're empty nesters, and we are reconnecting as husband and wife, and it's a very special time for us.
Phenomenal. So a million things that I would love to talk about with that. One thing that I would like to drill down on for a moment, and did not plan on this, but you mentioned working with young offenders and that sort of thing. I also have been able to do that in many different ways than you have, but something that certainly is my heart is troubled young people, that sort of thing. David, what's one of the big things that when you are dealing with young people who have really, they're just getting involved in all sorts of things that you look at them as young people and you think, my lands, how do you get so far off the path in getting involved in some of the violence and maybe drug abuse or just all sorts of things? As you deal with people, with young people like that, what's one of the big things that you see that they're missing? One of the big things that they need? What's one of the sort of, maybe one of the commonalities that you see with young people who really have big challenges that you see in their lives that they either need or don't have or whatever?
One of the students that we work with early on when my wife and I were in ministry, her name is Rhonda. She lost her parents when she was very young, and she lived with a relative, and she had a lot of trauma in her life, and she had not very much direction, I guess you'd say. And she was really struggling, and we were invited over by her relative to meet her for a dinner. And it was kind of an ambush because she didn't know we were coming. And we're sitting at the table, and she's like, "Who are these people?" Found out that she played as a high school or young adult. She played hockey in a men's league, and she was the goalie, and she was as tough as nails. So we said, "Hey," she said, "Yeah, I'm playing tonight, and I have a thing." So I'm like, "Can we come watch?" And she's like, "Why would you do that?" And I said, "Well, because we are interested in you and what you're doing, and we would love to come and support you and cheer you on." And she's like, "Yeah, right."
Yeah.
So fast forward, there we are sitting in the stands. We're the only two people in the stands because it's just a pickup hockey league. And we're cheering for her as if she was the star of the show. And you could see her looking from the ice up into the stands, shaking her head like, "Who are these people? Why are you doing this?
These people are
Right?
crazy.
Why are you here? There's no one else has a fan, just me." And that relationship turned into something way special for us, where she was lacking a parental figure in her life. My wife and I, even though we were pretty close in age, we were able to bring her into our family unit in a sense, where we really did life with her. And I think that was the one thing that she was struggling with, was a sense of identity in the lack of having someone special in her life as a parental figure that she could look up to. She was really missing out on that. And we were able in that moment to find our special place in her life. And to this day, we still do life with her. And it's crazy because that was many years ago that we did this, but there's still something special there. So I think just missing out on who is that person that you can pattern your life after. And I think there's a lot of people missing that today.
No question. And I appreciate the work that you do, Dave, to bring that to people and to help parents be more of, particularly dads, to be more of that, right? I mean, we're not, just because you can biologically father a child doesn't mean that you are necessarily equipped to be a good dad, a competent dad. Biological capability and emotional capability, parenting skill, those are not all identical. And so you have started a podcast. I don't know if there are more connections, ministry or whatever, but Dad Space, right?
Right.
And so tell us about Dad Space.
So I started Dad Space on Father's Day last year was my first episode. The idea behind it was on Mother's Day. Good luck finding a table at your local restaurant when you want to take your mother or your wife or your out for dinner or for lunch to celebrate. No way. You got to book way in advance. And then Father's Day, complete opposite. You can sit anywhere you like. There's seats everywhere. You can blow a cannon off. You're not going to hit anybody. And I'm like, why is that? Why is there this big difference between Mother's Day and Father's Day? And I just wanted to create a space very similar to what you're doing. So excited to be connected with you, but to give a space for men to encourage them to be good to their partners, good to their children, good to their community. But I think the biggest thing as well is to be good to themselves and to have those conversations and have that community around being a dad, a father, however that looks for you. We just need each other and we can have a conversation. And the beautiful thing about podcasts is no one knows what you're listening to.
Yeah.
So you could have your earbuds in and you could be doing your thing and
Yeah.
somebody notices you that you might be listening to music. They have no idea, but we can have an honest, genuine conversation to support our listeners, and you can participate and nobody knows that you're even listening to the show. If it's something that you're challenged by or you're working through, you can listen and we can be a part of your life and you can be a part of ours.
Podcasts I have listened to have completely changed my life, improved my life in so many ways, been such a crucial part of my personal growth. And I love what you said there because, I've got a program, a coaching program for husbands and fathers who want to stop taking their frustration out on their wives and kids. And it's amazing. I post a lot about it on Facebook and I get lots of reaction from women. I get lots of comments from women. I get lots of interaction with moms, wives. But when it comes to that, it's like crickets, right? Because as men, we're so reluctant to admit that we are scared or needy or maybe lack some skills that we need or that we're struggling or suffering. As dads, as men, we're just reluctant to let people know that we need help. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's getting better, but I think it's still a reality. And so what you're saying is beautiful because you're providing men a way to get the help they need without having to endure the embarrassment of being seen to get the help that they need. And sometimes that's where we got to start out. And that's cool. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And maybe that will lead to some other deeper, more interactive help down the road. I think would be a great goal there. So just as an aside, David, something you were talking about a minute ago about Mother's Day. I was being interviewed on another podcast, Joey Conklin, who's phenomenal. He also does work with and for dads. He's in Alabama here in the States. And I'll try to connect you two, David. I think you two would love to know each other. But he said that he had his kids out at the store and he was in line with his kids. And a woman looked at him and said, "Oh, is it your weekend with the kids?"
Wow.
And he went, "I'm just out with my kids." He said, "My wife and I we're still together. I'm just out with my kids." And I was telling him that it used to drive me crazy when I would have my kids and people would say, "Oh, you're babysitting your kids."
Right. Yeah. You're watching the kids this weekend? Yeah.
No, I'm not watching.
Yeah.
I'm fathering my kids, man. I mean, come on.
Right.
It's just there's such a difference in I mean, a lot of times as dads, we're at fault for that because we're not as present, we're not as engaged, we don't change diapers, we don't go to recitals. I mean, okay, fine. I mean, sometimes as dads we're not as active as we ought to be. But I think that default view of dads as sort of just disengaged and, you babysit them if you have to is really trying to get away from that. And I'm happy about what you're doing. David, I can't help but think that as you have done this work, as you've just been a father, but then as you've done this work for dads, and with dads, I bet you've had a lot of time to reflect on your own relationship with your dad. Happy for you to share whatever you want to or not to, but I would just be really interested in hearing a few things about your own relationship with your dad. What was that like as far as you're comfortable sharing about that?
Yeah, my dad was my hero. I lost my dad to cancer many, many years ago. And he was around for all three of my children to be born into the world, and he got to have interaction with them. But we lost him far too young. And he was the type of guy who would do anything for you. He was a minister as well. He left a full-time job, packed up the family, and we moved way up north in Canada here in Ontario. We used to have paper maps back in the day.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, paper maps were a thing because we had no Google. For those
you couldn't fold them back. You could never fold them back.
No. Yeah, for people who have no idea what I'm talking about, it was actually a big piece of paper, and you could map out where you're going. But in Ontario, our province is so big that there was a second side. You actually flip the map over.
Wow.
So we were not on the first page, we were on the back side of the map. That's how far up we were. But I can remember my dad going to a small little town, and we lived there, and he served as a pastor in a very small community. I remember one story he did as a minister. He had a wedding one weekend, and just after the rehearsal for the wedding, one of the family members passed away.
Wow.
So he had to
Wow.
do a wedding
Wow.
and a funeral on the
No
same
way.
weekend.
No way.
And he looked so empty by the end of that.
Yeah.
Because the emotions of having all those people in town and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And I remember a nice gentleman in the church took us out fishing to get us away from it all. And my dad just sat in the boat with me. It was me, my dad, and this gentleman. I loved it. I got to go fishing. I had no idea what was going on, but my dad just sat there, and I can remember him just being so somber and trying to deal with everything. Right.
Yeah.
And in that moment, as I look back at that, that's what I feel again for men is we don't have those connections. We don't have those people in our life that when something traumatic like that happens, or we live through something, where do we go? Who do
Yeah.
we talk to, and who's in our corner?
Yep.
And for my dad in that moment, that gentleman was, and I'm so thankful that he was, but as you can just remember that part of my superhero dad being empty. And what a scary feeling to see somebody I love and cherish at the end of his rope, like he had nothing left to give. So that again sparks me to put something out into the world and say, if there's a guy listening and you feel like you're at the end of your rope, no matter what that situation is, there's going to be somebody who's going to get you in their boat and take you somewhere so that you can have that space to just talk about it, or just be quiet and just have somebody sit there with you. That's kind of a thing. And if you look biblically, there's lots of mentions about Jesus in a boat and all these things, right? So
good point.
There's a
That's
lot
good
of times where we just need to get in. We just need to get in the boat as men and find somebody with us that can, again, just either speak life into us or just hold a space for us. And I think that's really what I'm hoping to do, not just with the podcast, but with being a part of somebody's life, is how can I hold the door for you? And I think we need to do more of that in our life.
No question, particularly as men. Women generally are better at that, connecting and supporting 100%. And that sort of thing. And it's a beautiful thing. One thing I think, David, what you said sparked the thought that I think a lot of times as men, particularly, we're a little afraid to reach out to another man that we see suffering because they don't know what to say. Somebody just told me this the other day. They said, I want to reach out to this person. And they said, but I don't know what to say. And I'm afraid that I won't know what to say. And, what I always remember, David, is the story of Job and his 3 friends. Job was suffering, brutally suffering. His 3 friends show up and they sat with him for a week and nobody said anything. And then they opened their mouths and started talking, and it just went down the commode. You remember that? I mean, they start talking, and then that makes it worse. And so I think that a lot of times as men, you don't have to say anything. You go out in a boat and fish and everybody be quiet, or just watch TV together, or play golf together, or drive around. I used to love to just ride around with my friends and listen to music. You don't have to say anything. In fact, sometimes when you talk, you make things worse because we come out with these platitudes about they're better off, or there's other fish in the sea, or when God closes a door, he opens a window. Well, that doesn't help me any. So I think just being together can be a really powerful thing. David, what do you think about that?
Yeah. And the other part too, is I see a lot of posts on social media where there's somebody on camera and they're laughing and they're joking and they're singing and all this. And then you see a caption that comes across the bottom and said, "This was my last footage of my friend before he took his life." And you're like, wait a minute. Like, it's not somebody that's in the corner, like huddled in a little mass and can't do life. It's those happy people who seem like they have the world together, are struggling with inner things that no one has any idea about. And again, to have somebody just come and sit beside you and do life with you,
Yeah.
that opens the door to, hey, I'm not by myself here. I'm not. And that really, again, I think that's one simple thing that all of us can do, is just find that space where we can just be together and be available. That's going to
Yeah.
help so many people.
No, I love that. And I, David, one thing I assume, because I was, troubled for most of my life, inadequate, felt inadequate, unworthy, not included. And one thing that I try to view everybody as if they were struggling with, a momentous problem. I try to deal with everybody that way, to assume that people are struggling with things and to give them attention and kindness, so that they do know that somebody cares about them. Because so many people, it's not that people feel hated, they just feel overlooked. They feel insignificant. They feel
Right.
like a nothing. And I've been there. And I know how that is. I think the worst thing is not to be hated. The worst thing is to be ignored.
Yeah.
And if we could just not ignore people. But so thank you for those amazing thoughts. So let me ask you this. You have 3 grown children, 20s, David, is that right? Or 30s?
Yep. 20s. Yep.
So how would you describe yourself as a dad? So what kind of dad are you? If I were to ask your children, or if I were to ask your children's friends, first 2 or 3 words that come up for David as a dad, they would say what?
I would say welcoming, goofy, and someone who makes you feel like you're at home. That's kind of who I think I would be perceived as. My wife might have a completely different answer for you, to be honest.
I'm going to ask you someday. I'm going to ask her, David, and we're going to put that in the show notes. Here's what she said.
Jen, if you're listening, just go along with this, okay? Yeah, that's kind of what I would think of. Yeah, that was what comes to mind.
That's amazing. Why is it important to you to be, so all 3 of those things, you said welcoming, goofy, and what was the other one? Making you feel at home. Was it home?
Yeah, home. Yeah, exactly.
So all 3 of those things speak to me of wanting to make another person feel comfortable in your presence. Why is that important to you?
Because I think people don't do enough of that, to be quite honest. If you're not doing life the way I want you to do life, then you're not a part of my life.
Sure.
And I've seen that in family in the past, in other situations. And if you don't fit the mold, you're not included. And that's something that I see in life, right? My kids have all chosen paths that I don't think I would have wished for when they were little. And during the pandemic, we had to limit the bubble for our family, like our interactions with our outside community, because our employers are saying, listen, when we're early days of pandemic, they didn't know what was going on. They're like, so everyone has to kind of stay in a bubble and limit your exposure to other people. So we went to the kids and said, you guys are all in relationships. I can't have you going to their home and they're going to someone else's home. I have to give a report to my boss on our family bubble, which is really weird, because then my kids, who were all at home at the time, were like, well, then we're going to go. And I'm like, what do you mean you're going to go? Well, I'm going to move out.
Wow.
So in the period of weeks, which would have maybe taken years to see develop, all 3 of our kids packed up and moved out.
Wow.
Leaving Jen and I on our own.
Man, oh man.
Which is like, you talk about taking the Band-Aid off, like ripping it off.
Yeah.
That really stung for us, because it was like a domino effect. Once one went, the next one went, and the next one went. And they all went into situations which were rough to begin with. Seeing them struggle with finances when they've never had to do their own finances.
Sure.
Jobs, living accommodations. And again, we're at arm's length during the pandemic. So we had to be very, it was very tough. And I don't hear a lot of dads talk about that side of seeing an empty nest develop in front of you. And that was really, really painful for my wife and I in that stage. Because we went from everyone under one roof, which feels so safe as a dad when you know your kids are in their beds and I can go to bed and feel peace. it went from a peaceful situation to a very unpeaceful situation for us, because now we don't know where our kids are. Are they good? Are they healthy? Have they had their lunch today? I have no idea. So the whole world was spun around for us in a very short amount of time, which brought Jen and I together, and we really had to lean on each other for that.
You know, that Dave, that's a story that I don't know, that type of story. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody deal with that ever. I've never heard that. I don't think. But I mean, to lose, not lose, but to become an empty nester all in one fell swoop is unique. I mean, I don't think I've ever, and I can't imagine. My oldest son went to the Army several years ago, so he's out of the house. My daughter is going to college this fall. We'll leave our youngest son at home. And it's been gradual, and which is, I mean, the way it's supposed to work, quote unquote. So you kind of adjust to it as you go along.
Yeah.
But to all of a sudden just be, I just can't imagine how that must have felt. And I think, did you say that sort of was one of the things that led you to be thinking about dads and dad space and that kind of, was that one of the impetus to that?
Yeah, there's obviously time in my calendar now.
Right.
And there's an emptiness. There's a big word. That's why empty is part of empty nest. There is an emptiness that kind of fills in. And in that moment, I think the one thing that I found with my wife is that the two of us, the house got really, really quiet. And even our relationship got quiet in that we didn't really know what to say to each other. It was a different time. We were both grieving, losing all three kids at once. And we turned inwardly silent to each other, which then your mind starts to spin. You're like, well, what's going on with us now? Right now that we have all this time to focus on ourselves. And it really made us focus on each other and figure out, okay, we're back to the two of us again. It's been 20 plus years since we've sat in a room together by ourselves.
Yeah.
And now what?
Yeah.
So that's when the idea of Dad Space kind of came up for me, is who else is feeling this right now? Because I would really like to talk to them, because I don't know who in my circle is feeling this, and I don't know how to reach them. So in that moment, it's like, well, then just go create something and start it then. If it's not there, start it. So
Amen.
I said, well, let's just start a podcast and see where it goes. And now I've had the chance to interact with some amazing men around the world. And the thing that I find amazing to me is that 75% of my audience are female listening to my podcast.
Why do you think that is?
I have no idea. Either maybe they're handing their phone to their spouse and partner saying, listen to this podcast on my phone. I don't know. I don't know really what it is, but there's something there, so that I'm not going to change my message or tweak it for my new audience I wasn't expecting. I'm going to keep going where I'm going because they're showing up for a reason. So I'm going to keep going down the path of speaking to men and to dads. But it's interesting to kind of see how the audience comes around you. And even though you have an ideal person in mind that you're talking to, you're actually talking to a room full of people you weren't expecting.
I don't think you had mentioned that to me before. That is an amazing thing. I'm gonna have to wrap my head around that and really think about why it would be such a female heavy audience. It's just, that's an interesting thing. As we move toward the conclusion, a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. What's your biggest challenge as a dad? I think, David, I don't know you super well, but I feel like I've got a really good handle on you as a human being. And I love what I see. I feel such a connection to you. But you're not perfect as a dad. You seem like a phenomenal dad. I mean, genuinely, you seem like obviously you're not perfect. What's your biggest challenge? If you could fix one thing about yourself as a dad, what would it be?
I think it would be just talking more and sharing more of who I am with those around me. I think I'm a very inward person. I love being on my own and doing my own thing. Podcasting is great for that.
Yeah,
no, to sit in the basement and do your thing. I have to be conscious of getting away from this and putting myself out there. So my wife loves being out in the public and doing the thing. I'm the person that just can't wait to go back home. I've only been there 5 minutes, but I'm ready to leave. So I have to really work on that so that I can allow more people in. We talk about holding a space for someone. Sometimes I'm so inwardly focused that I'm not thinking about the person who's sitting beside me, whether that's virtually or in person. So how do I do that and be more conscious of that? And what doors would open if I was just a little bit more patient and a little bit more welcoming? And people, I think some people think I'm maybe arrogant in the sense that I'm not talking to people in a public space, but I am petrified.
Yeah.
They don't understand that
Yeah.
I'm just trying to protect myself here.
Yeah.
And it comes off that, well, Dave's not talking. Well, Dave's nervous.
Yeah.
So maybe for those people who see people like that in that light going, well, that person, they're rude. They don't even talk in public. They might be just struggling to be in public. So keep that in mind and maybe reach back out to us because
Yeah.
that might open the door to speak. When I make a connection with somebody, it's genuine, real, and long lasting. That's really my focus. I don't like fluff in
Yeah.
my relationships.
Yeah. No.
So if we connect, we connect.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the hardest thing is to get myself to that point where I can be the one initiating the connection instead of waiting for someone to connect with me.
That really resonated with me. A couple of things that you said. First of all, again, as I look at you from the outside, again, you're a musician. You have 100 podcasts. I don't know how many podcasts you have, but it's a bunch of. And so I really encourage everybody to really look at the other podcasts. It's just a wide variety of really fascinating topics that David does in his podcast. But I mean, a musician, a podcaster, a minister. Anybody looking at you would go, this is the ultimate extrovert. I mean, this guy's he's a glad hander and a social butterfly. And and it just goes to show you how badly we can misjudge people. I've been misjudged the same way. I've been misjudged because I was and I still am. I still get nervous in conversations with people. And I want to close the conversation down, not because I don't want to talk, but because I'm afraid I'm going to say something stupid. And I want to stop the conversation before I make a fool out of myself. But I have had many people come up to me over the years and go, when I first met you, I thought you were an arrogant jerk. Because, you put your chest out, you hold your head up, your nose is in the air, and you look like such an arrogant jerk. But all I was doing was protecting myself and exuding this false front, because I was scared to get hurt. And I'm still that way in a lot of ways. So I'm glad that people are hearing you say that what you see may not at all be what is really going on there. So reach out and make a connection. Then if they blow you off, fine. But most people won't. Most people are really happy to connect. So I appreciate you being vulnerable about that. And then I want to flip that question over, Dave. What's your biggest strength as a dad? And I don't want any false humility or, this. I want you to be honest, Dave. What are you great at when it comes to being a dad?
Oh, wow. That feels weird to say this. It feels like a little self-serving, but I think from my perspective, it's just connecting with my kids as often as I can. Now that they're out of the whole house, it's hard. When they're home, daddy's home, mommy's home, everyone's here. It's really easy when they're under one roof. It's a lot of work now to get in connection and do life with your kids once they've left the house. And it's thinking about it on a regular basis and putting that in front of me so that I am reminded that I need to make the effort. Again, for somebody who's shy, quiet, and inward, I now have to be the opposite with my kids because they're not here. So I have to put myself out to make it easier for them. That whole cats in the cradle thing that oh gosh, that song, it's like the fact that I'm too busy. I don't have time for my kids. Now my kids are too busy. They don't have time for me.
Yeah.
I really have to make the effort and not wait for it to be reciprocated back to me. So that's the one thing is I think I'm doing a good job. Again, you could ask my kids, they could verify or deny that claim, but I am purposely trying my hardest. When I'm a night shift worker and my calendar is different than my family, I talked about going out for dinner tonight with family. For me, it's going to be 5 o'clock in the morning that we're going to get together and have dinner. It's going to be hard to be social and when you're exhausted, but I got to do it. I got to get myself out there. I can't be in my little bubble and think I'm good on my own, because that's the opposite of dad space, and the opposite of what you're doing is we're not good on our own. We need people in our life.
100%. I think all the time, in so many contexts about Ecclesiastes chapter 4, which talks about, two are better than one. They have a good return for their labor. If one falls, how's he going to pick himself up? But his companion can pick him up. And a cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart.
Right.
And so just this biblical principle, and just this common sense principle, that the more we have around us, the more support, the more love, the more listeners, the more advice givers, we're just going to be better off. And as men, we close ourselves off against that. And we just, as you said, and one thing we talk in my coaching programs about all the time is intention, being intentional. Default mode is going the wrong direction. If we just say, well, that's just how I am, I'm just going to default to how I am, it's not going to go well. But we need to be intentional about up-leveling ourselves in every way. And even though that can be difficult and challenging, which is what you're talking about doing, and I love it. So last question, Dave, I have for you. What is the most important thing? And I know this is almost an unfair question, because anytime we ask a question like this, it's like, well, I'm shortchanging the things I have to leave out. But I really want you to give me one thing. What is the one thing that is the most important thing for dads to get right? I
love drive. This is a weird way to answer this. I tell people I don't know how to drive automatic vehicles. Wow. I tell everybody that I can only drive standard manual transmission. Wow. And they're like, that's a weird thing to say. And the reason why is I feel like when I drive my wife's van, it's the minivan, right? So you feel like you're on a couch with a steering wheel, and it's just like, am I really driving, or am I just a passenger in my own vehicle? When I drive my little sporty car, which I bought, which is a 6-speed, it's got sunroof, it's got power, everything, it's manual. And you know what? When I'm in that car, if I don't do it right, it's going to go horribly wrong. So I have to listen to the engine. I have to anticipate. I can gear up. I can gear down. I can go into neutral. It's really kind of cool. I'm driving the car. It's not driving me in this situation. And if I go on the highway and I'm in 6th gear and I decide to drop it down to 1st, the car's going to fight me. But yes, I can do it. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to sound horrible. Yes. I have options. I can pick a gear that works for me in the moment, and I can do all kinds of great stuff. And again, I am in control of what's happening in the vehicle because it's standard. It's relying on me. And good thing, most people won't steal my car because they can't drive standard. So not anymore. It's a great theft deterrent as well. So highly recommend. But for me, when I'm in that car, the feeling of being in the right gear as you come out of a corner, I'm not speeding, but you're coming out of a corner, you can drop it down a gear, you want to go out and pass or something, you can manipulate your transmission and make the car do what you want to do. Instead of pushing the gas and hoping for something to happen. So I love finding my gear. And as men, I think we need to find our gear, because in that moment, when you find the right gear, whether that is you need to be engaged, and there's another word, when you push the clutch, you engage the clutch and disengage the clutch, right? There's so much going on here that it's a great mirror for men and for families. How are you engaged? Are you in the right gear? Are you using everything possible to be as effective as possible for me driving or being a dad? So I just encourage everyone to find the right gear in life and in your relationships, so that you are the most productive and you are using everything possible that's at your resources in the moment. So driving a standard car for me is a reminder every day that we need to be in the right space. That's why I call it dad space, for that reason. It's a space for dads, but to be in the right space, engaged, in the right gear, going somewhere, and bringing someone along with us on the ride. So that's kind of my theory for life. Again, I'm not a driver of anyone who I'm a supporter of anything automatic. I'm like, that's very passive for me. I like the active act of driving a car that's manual. It's just something different. If you don't know how to drive it, you're probably going, Dave, I have no idea what you're saying. But when somebody jumps in the car with me and they look over and go, oh, it's standard.
Yes.
And they look over at me like, you know how to do
Right.
this? And I'm like, yeah, I've been doing this since I was 16.
And it's a
right?
blast.
And
Yes.
and they watch you and they're like, how do you know how to? And then the really fun thing for me is get on a really sharp hill where it's straight up and down.
Sure.
And
Yep.
the car behind you pulls
Yes.
right up behind you because they think, and you have 2 feet and 3 pedals. Now figure that out.
Yes.
Okay, so you have your clutch all the way in, you have your brake on, and somehow you have to get your brake from your right foot from the brake to the gas with releasing the clutch without going backwards on a steep hill in the snow. You got to do all these things at once, right? And I think that's a lot. What happens to dads is we have all these things we have to do at once.
Yeah.
We got to figure out, okay, in this moment, I don't want to slide backwards and total the car behind me. I don't want to pop the clutch and stall. I got to do this right. I got one shot at this. I get one shot. It's going to be really good or really, really bad. And people in the passenger seat looking at you, are you okay? Are you going to be able to do this? and you do it and you feel that you have that moment where you take your foot off the gas, you have the clutch slightly engaged, and you're sitting there between go and no go, and you're able to put your foot on the gas, your clutch is coming out slightly, and you're just holding yourself there. Your foot's not even on the brake anymore.
Yep.
And that's that moment where you let the clutch off and push the gas forward.
Yeah.
That engaged feeling is what I think men need to do more of right now.
I love
how can we engage with each other?
I love it. What a great metaphor. And for guys, I mean, what a great metaphor for men who love cars and driving. And I can drive a stick shift on exactly what you're talking about. And it's such a great experience. And, you know, one of the great things about it is if you're doing it wrong, the car will tell you. You know, I think a lot of times when we're grinding the gears in life, or we're in the wrong gear, or trying to force it into a gear that it's not, you know, life is responding and it's telling us that's not working, but we keep trying it anyway, just grind and grind and grind. Instead of going, okay, wait a minute, that's a signal and I need to change gears and do something different. So such an awesome, if you haven't done a podcast, David, on that, just fleshing that whole thing out, you could do a series on that or sermons or something, man, that's beautiful. So, so Dave, let me let you, if you don't mind, tell people everywhere that they can find you, which is a million places. But I would really encourage everyone who's hearing this, please reach out to Dave, listen to his podcast. He's got other podcasts that may resonate with you. He's just got an amazing spirit and heart. He's a phenomenal human being. And my life is better for having David in my life, and yours will be too. So David, what are the top ways that people can connect with you?
Thank you for having a space for me today, Dave. I really appreciate being on your podcast.
Of course.
You're a great host. Well done, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Well done. Thank you for holding a spot for me. I don't get to guest on many shows.
I know.
Which is it's really odd. I've hosted my own for many times, but not being a guest. So it's fun for me as well. I basically created my own podcast network by accident. I have 7 different shows.
Yeah.
In the last year, I have over 550 episodes combined.
Wow.
Across all 7 shows. So one of my shows has I just celebrated my 200th episode, and it's only 16 months old.
That's huge. That's huge. For people who don't, and I'm a baby podcaster, but for people who don't do this sort of thing, do not understand how phenomenally successful that is. 200 episodes. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, because normally an average podcaster might do 1 a week, which is 52 a year. So to have 216 months is
phenomenal.
My mic is exhausted. But anyway, so truemediasolutions.ca is my podcast network, I guess you could say, that I've kind of created that houses all of my podcasts. But Dad Space is the one we're really focused on today. Dadspace.ca. It's a Canadian website instead of the .com. We have .ca's up here in Canada, but dadspace.ca has everything about the podcast and about our community that we're working on. And if you're looking for a space as a dad, somewhere just to come or a boat to climb into, and you just need some time with somebody to go fishing, virtually, whatever you need. That's what Dad Space is. And we have great guests like Dave on the podcast and so many other people there. So it's a great resource for people. And again, if I can do life with you or help you in any way, or you just need to climb in my boat and spend a few moments together, let's do that. But Dave, thanks for holding a space for me today.
Phenomenal, David. I just can't thank you enough. Thank you for being here, and thank all the listeners for tuning in. Obviously, if we didn't have listeners, Dave, wouldn't be much point in doing what we do. So we're so happy that folks are listening. And so please reach out to Dave and connect with him and show him some love and receive the love that he's giving to you, because it's genuine and it's extraordinary. And so I just appreciate Dave. So thanks for listening, and hope that you'll tune in again to the Take Back Your Life podcast. Everybody have a phenomenal day.
So a lot of fun being on Dave's podcast. Again, if you have a podcast and you're looking for a guest, I have my hands up here. I would love to come on your show and talk about my dad journey or podcasting or music, whatever. Hey, I've got 7 shows. I've got something to talk about, and I would love to be on your show. Let me know if we can make this happen, and I'd love to come on and talk to your audience and interact with you on your podcast. But again, thank you for listening to Dad Space. Looking forward to the next episode. So happy to be able to do this for dads. A reminder, we do have a Dad Space community where you can join and participate with other dads and share your dad journey. And all the information is included on our website, dadspace.ca. I would love to hear from another dad. Go hit that little microphone, leave me a message, and we'll include you here on the next episode of Dad Space. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on the next one. See you then.